Welcome back to another episode of the Bryan Air podcast, leading the aviation conversation from the flight deck and beyond. This show brings you real talk for real aviators, from airline operations and training standards to leadership in and out of the flight deck. If you're serious about staying current, staying sharp, and building long-term impact in your life, you're in the right place. Today, I'm joined by Kim James, Director of Operations at Aerial Works, and widely known as the Drone Chick. Kim has pioneered security drone operations in South Africa and internationally. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, Kim.
Thank you so much for having me, and really looking forward to our conversation, Bryan.
Yeah, you're one of those people as well that sort of started following you a while back and sort of followed this progression of, I suppose, your own branding into this drone space. And I don't know who first called you the Drone Chick, but that is the best. It's such a useful name because when you think of drones, I do think about you. So it's working. But I've sort of followed your journey, and your path to getting to where you are is not, you didn't exactly grow up and say, I'm going to run a drone business one day. So I've got you in my research that you were on the banking side. So how on earth did you make the transition into drones?
So many people ask, but I think everyone will have a strange answer to a question like this, because I don't think this industry existed. Well, I mean, I think in South Africa, Part 101 was promulgated in 2015. So 10 years ago, who would have thought we would be sitting here talking about drones? So that wasn't a obvious transition. But having spent 25 years doing stuff in the financial services and banking industry, I was out of the country for 18 years. And then at some point I was needing to make a change from being an expat, came back to South Africa, spent some time with aging parents and things like that. And I fell into it. I promise you, I was not the entrepreneur. My business partner, who happens to be my husband, came up with the idea, and I was roped in, but we can probably talk about that a little bit more. But yeah, that was not the plan at all. I was going to come back and do some really cool financial services HR stuff. And it did not work. That was a big fail. And here I am, like 8 years later, the Drone Chick.
Those stories are always the interesting ones. I suppose a path less traveled. Even today, but I suppose more so back when you got into it. I mean, if you were speaking to family and friends trying to explain what you're doing, I'm sure you got the odd response like, but aren't those just toys the kids play with, that you buy at Macro?
Well, interesting. The initial years, probably even, I never really used to share what I was doing to my previous networks. I just thought people in my banking network internationally are just going to think I'm doing weird stuff and that I've gone nuts. And it was only during lockdown that I started posting. And I just thought, you know what, this is it. This is what I'm doing now. And I just need to own it. And the rest is history. But I think because my business partner is an aviator and software engineer and has a electronics engineering background, we kind of approached this from a more technical aspect anyway. But yeah, no one really knew what the whole drone thing was, except for let's apply for a license, because you had to do that, and let's just start doing this thing. We didn't really know what we were going to do until we did. So early on, we knew we needed to do drone security because it was solving a big problem, and we can delve into that a little bit more as well. But yeah, no one really knew. I think they were all just going, okay, you do your thing, bless you. Good luck. And yeah, it was good luck was needed, that's for sure.
Yeah, you touched on it then before we get into the security side, because that's obviously a major thing when we think about drones now. But you did touch on a point there. You said, I'm going to start posting. I'm going to start sort of pushing myself out there in that space. And I suppose that's where I started to notice you and start to take interest in what's this drone business all about. There's lots of courses these days. There are lots of people that are trying to use this time in history, because we're in a real transition stage, I suppose, where we've got AI and all sorts of things that are at play that we don't quite know what's going to happen, what we're going to do with it. But what we do know is that business is changing, and your old-fashioned roles that you may have once aspired to may not exist in a couple of years. So a lot of people are putting a lot of effort to, get their own personal branding out there. So you got a jump start on that. But can you just take us back, that initial, when you started doing it, was there any sort of imposter syndrome, that sort of, what are people going to think when I post this? And, follow-up question, what value did you obviously push through, and, what has been the subsequent value of making those posts and positioning yourself as the drone chick?
Bryan, I think the thing that I realized early on, first of all, during lockdown, what was I going to do? And I literally, in that first week, I said, I'm going to listen to one free webinar a day, because everyone was starting to do free stuff. People that were selling online courses, people that were normally selling their consulting time were doing free online webinars. And the very, very first one that I listened to was around just posting stuff, and the fact that people buy from people and not from brands. And so I was like, okay, that's cool, whatever. And the second thing was that I was learning as well. I mean, I had no idea about aviation. I knew about flying because, my husband flies or whatever. But other than that, nothing. And I was trying to look for information to up my knowledge, to get in the game. And there was nothing. And anyone who was already in the drone industry at that point in time, and there were a handful of people, very closed and very keep your stuff close to your chest because it's very competitive. People weren't sharing information. So I was like, do you know what, actually, if there's nothing for me to learn from, or no one for me to learn from, there's no resource, there's no kind of, guide, or, this is how to do it, then why don't I share what I'm learning? Because I'm sure there were other people to learn as well. And so that's why I started sharing just what am I doing? It was basically a conversation. Okay, today I'm doing this. Today I learned this. Tomorrow I'm planning to do whatever it was. So that's what I did. And then if anyone knows me from way back when, I am just me. I'm not polished. I just say it how it is. And so imposter syndrome, I don't know. I don't think I've ever had that. I mean, obviously, I don't want to look like an idiot. I don't want to pretend. I think that's the key. And I'll kind of end off this piece with that, just to say, I never pretend to know something I don't. If I've learned something, I'll articulate it as best I can. But the imposter syndrome thing was really not there. It was really around, hey, I'm in this and I'm learning, and I'm going to share what I learn. And that's kind of where it started, and just posting every day about what I was doing. I don't have that much time to do that anymore because now I'm running an actual business. Yeah. But at the time, it was just piecemeal.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I suppose as well, if we compare, you're sort of saying your husband's on the aviation side, obviously I'm on the aviation side. One of the difficult things for me was, how do I position myself as a thought leader in aviation? Particularly if you think about South African aviation, you had a lot of the same names. They were slightly older generation for many, many years. And they were sort of on this level. And I had that, how do I kind of position myself? I wanted to be above those guys, And I suppose I had a bit of imposter syndrome. But what I'm encouraging people to do now is, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but drones being such a new industry, who were the thought leaders in the space? And it was, you positioned yourself quite early on. So, hey, put your hand up. I am a thought leader. This is what I have to say. And to be honest, if you weren't posting that stuff, I still would know nothing about drones. So, yeah, you have sort of made an impact there. And I must tap you on the back for that. And I do thank you for posting what you do, because I think it's a really really important industry at the moment. And if you're not following what's going on and you're in the aerospace space, then you should start, because it is going to have an impact on maybe not your job straight away, but certainly the aerospace industry is busy changing.
Yeah, you've said something really important, and that's that thing where do you position yourself? I don't think I positioned myself on purpose. I kind of was just doing what I was doing. But rocking up to conferences maybe, or having conversations with other business leaders at the time. There was one person in the industry who I think we connected on LinkedIn, and he asked me something, and it was kind of in an inbox DM scenario. And I said, oh, but we're competitors. And he went, that's okay. Like this space is for everybody. And he actually made me realize that, you know what, we're all wanting a piece, no matter how senior we are. We can all share something that would make sense to someone. And the assumption that someone knows more than you is good, but the assumption that you don't know enough to be part of a conversation is wrong. And so where you were saying, Bryan, you were trying to position yourself, and there were a lot of people that had way more experience than you. Sometimes it's just a case of going up there and being authentically honest about, hey, this is what we're doing now. Imagine, I was talking the other day to someone about my very first conference presentation in 2019. I died. I thought I was just shocking. I probably was. No one told me. I felt like I was shocking. But I just stood there and I just presented on what we were doing. At that point in time, punching way above our weights. Like at that point, we didn't have experience. We were just, kind of starting out. And then the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Now you can start talking about what you actually have done.
Yeah.
And then you realize that everyone's just doing the same thing, you know, and as the industry is evolving, everyone's evolving with you. So, yeah, I think it's maybe sometimes about being brave and just saying it. And then you realize that the feedback is very much that we're all in the same place. And if we can accommodate each other in our growth and positioning ourselves where we fall out, not fall out, but like fall into place, that's cool. Yeah,
I love that, being brave. We've spoken a bit about that lately with my podcast co-host Ryan. We say, if we want to take the podcast to the next level, then you actually have to be brave. And I think, if you're on your deathbed there one day, you probably wish that you were a little bit braver in your life in general. So yeah, being brave for sure, a key part. Kim, how is the South African drone industry compared to what you're seeing in Europe and the States? Are we on a par? Are we behind? Obviously, they've got things like people are getting their Amazon deliveries delivered by drones in the States. We're not quite there yet in South Africa. Where do we stand? Are we way behind the curve, or are we on track?
Wow, I love this question. And for anyone listening, this was not planted, but whenever anyone asks me this, and even provoked, I will share this. We in South Africa beat ourselves up. We always think we're behind. We always think we're the underdogs, and we are not. And I have presented in Ireland. I've been to the US, and with the platform Women in Drones Africa, I speak a lot to my colleagues in the US and in Europe. We beat ourselves up without reason. We're actually further ahead of the game than we think we are. So let me validate that. We were the first in the world to actually formalize drone regulations. In 2015, Part 101 was promulgated, as I mentioned earlier on. And how do you know what to do? The people who did that came up with a certification model, which in hindsight, is probably the most restrictive way to launch regulations. So in short, whether you're operating a 250 grand baby drone or a 4-meter wingspan vertical takeoff and landing fixed wing drone, as we do, you have the same rigorous regulations to abide by. And in that instance, your little drone is probably over-regulated, or the operations with that, and your large, 25 kilogram drone is under-regulated, because now we're sharing airspace with manned aircraft, with helicopters. It's scarier times. So that's what we did in 2015. We have been operating beyond visual line of sight in controlled airspace over people, property, and public roads at night since the beginning. And we are still seeing posts from Europe and from the US where people are applying for exemptions to operate a BVLOS flight. They're not operating at night. And so this is not my wording, but our ops spec, our operation specification that drone operators can work to is deep. You can from the get-go operate at night over people in controlled airspace. If you've proven to the CAA you can do it. So in that aspect, I think we're ahead. Where I think we're lagging is in change or innovation in moving these regulations to aid industry growth. But everyone's struggling with that. You've got the regulator that says we're regulating, and you've got industry that's got technology that is way outstriding regulation. But the regulator's job is to keep airspace safe. And so how do you do that? You can't just, let everyone do what they want to do. So there are things in play to try and create a categorization model which will allow risk-based operation in a category, which is not as arduous. And then I'd say the other thing that I have done, I've been a nerd, and I have looked at stats from the US, from the UK, from Australia, from Ireland, and from ourselves in terms of what's available anyway. The amount of drones that are registered, the amount of pilots that have done their certification. It's not comparing apples with apples, but still. And people here get very excited about the fact that we're so behind, and we only have 3,000 trained or certified drone pilots, and the US has 300 and something thousand. But if you look at that per capita, nobody has more than 1% of their population as certified drone pilots. And so if you look at it on that scale, we are 0.0 something, and they are 0 point something, per capita. But I honestly don't think we're that behind, given our economic situation, given our, socioeconomic issues and our regulations. We've got a lot to do, but we've done a lot.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Yeah, I agree with you. I think we're always inclined to think in South Africa we're behind the curve, and a lot of the time that's not the case. Clearly here. You spoke about the regulator there. It's such a new thing. I'm sure you've had to educate the regulator from time to time as to what it's all about. Are you supported by our local CAA in this regard? Are they a hindrance to growth, or are they assisting you guys with growth in the industry?
Let's see how I answer. Depends who's listening. I'm joking. So look, we have always approached the regulator in a way that says we are wanting to, and we comply. The rules of engagement and the rules of operation are X, Y, and Z. We have to do that. We've grown our business on being legal and ethical, and we never want to be questioned on that. So we pride ourselves on doing that. We also approach our annual audits from a position of we're willing to learn, we're willing to share, and can we have a mutually beneficial session where you need to tick your boxes, but can we each walk away from this audit having learned something? Yeah. And if each year, as the industry matures and evolves, the inspectors learn and evolve too. And so the audits have changed over time. And I think, especially now with the VTOLs and the more complicated systems, the inspectors do need to be exposed to what we're putting into the market and what they have to regulate. So we often share information. We sometimes have sessions with them where they actually, all get on a call and we're informing them of what we're doing. And yeah, the individual inspectors probably do have a hard time keeping up with what we're doing because they need to regulate it. They need to audit it. So yeah, I think from our perspective, I'm very lucky in that, my business partner and my colleague who's also a director in our company are aviators. They understand the real nitty-gritty of what we're doing. And from my banking background, from a compliance perspective, I get that too. So I think we're evolving together. And what I would then say is, obviously with a industry that's growing, or let's say evolving, well, our industry isn't growing as fast as it should, but it's evolving for sure. From a tech perspective, it's difficult because when we're wanting to roll out on a site and put in a bunch of drones and a bunch of people, that's an economic expansion. That is a commercial expansion. I can create jobs, I can put on drones, and I can keep an infrastructure or high value assets safe. But now it takes me 4 months to get a drone registered. And if I'm, and this is going commercial, and the regulator doesn't have to and shouldn't really worry about commercials, they're worried about safety. But if I'm writing off a drone from a costing exercise perspective over 24 months, but 4 of those 24 months are idle because my drone is in a storeroom waiting to be registered, that's not cool. So in effect, the really, and I'm not saying that's a regulation, I think that's a process. So I don't mind complying with the regulations, and we can comply, but can that process happen quicker? And I know, dare I say it, but for us, I'd rather pay double the amount of money for registration and what we need to pay in fees, but get it done quicker. Yeah. So in a way, the stifling regulations and process is going to drive non-compliance.
Yeah, fully agree.
So that's where we are stuck. And I'm sure in general aviation, it's the same thing, right?
Yeah, fully agree. I don't think there's a pilot in the country that's had to wait for his license to come back that will disagree with you on that one. Yeah. So regulation, I don't think any of us in the industry have an issue following. Regulation is there. We build our business around that. So we're more than happy to comply. And as you say, the process, though, we often get let down. Hopefully that improves. And particularly in this industry, and I can imagine, the assets are expensive. And like you say, if they're sitting in a warehouse for 4 months not earning an income, then it's going to affect your business and it affects the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
Barriers of entry, Kim, you mentioned, so if a project like that comes up, obviously it has a big economic effect. I'm sure there might be some pilots listening to say, hey, looking to scale my own career and expertise, maybe going and doing a drone license is a good idea. Is it a good idea?
Obtaining a skill is always a good idea, Bryan. I would say if anyone can learn a new skill and get certified to do something, do it. It's expensive though. And right now with the certification model and the way that the drone licensing or certification has been built, it's expensive. And we have an aviation training organization. The curriculum that needs to be taught, the checks and balances, we have to do a restricted radio license. We have to do a class 3 medical. We have to do an English proficiency. It's basically PPL light. Okay. So when we have to teach this, and our approach is very much around doing it the right way. So we don't just churn people through, we do it the right way and the person will come out. We try and in our words, develop aviators. So my answer to your question is yes, absolutely do it. Are there enough drone pilot jobs around for everyone who's got a license? No. But I think in an industry that's fairly new, I don't know if that balance can ever be correct. I don't know about other industries where, a similar kind of thing is evident. But there's always going to be the lead and the lag. So right now, there are more pilots. There's an oversupply of pilots. And why? Because in our country, we obviously have the skills development focus, which is also good. But we have funded training programs. And I think where in years gone by, that funding used to go to aircraft mechanics in general and commercial aviation and pilots. I think a lot of that has been repurposed for drone pilot training in the advent of 4IR. And I know Cyril Ramaphosa a number of years ago started a 4IR commission. And the 4IR kind of thing that comes to mind when people talk about 4IR is drones. So everyone wants drones.
Yeah.
And therefore, how do you train? You train drone pilots. And so there's an oversupply at this point. So I would say if you get the opportunity, do it, but know that it doesn't guarantee you a job. And there are only, in my opinion and in my experience, 3 industries that are commercially viable right now and making money and also creating jobs. And that is security, which is where we hang out, surveying, inspection, engineering, and agriculture. Okay. And those are the areas where, where the jobs are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's interesting. Maybe it's more of a case of you might have someone that's thinking of becoming a pilot. They're not fully committed to it. They're about to go and do their PPL. Maybe it's something to look at there and say, but hang on, this is an emerging market and might be worth, starting off your career there as a drone pilot. I always find these industries that are sort of so new and on the rise are incredibly interesting because you got to watch them very, very closely and see how they develop. You guys are in the security space. Security in South Africa is priority number 1. How do drones help us with security?
Yeah. So look at it this way. This is how I think about drones in this space. It's a tool. And unlike coming back to the last point we just closed off on where, is it a good idea to become a drone pilot? A lot of people will look at a drone license and a drone as a solution without knowing what the problem is they're trying to solve. And having those 2 things is not enough. What is the problem? And the problem we're solving.
You posted about that. Yes, I'm sorry to break. You posted a comment, I think, yesterday or the day before on that exact thing, and I found it interesting because, solution and the problem, and understanding that it's a tool. I think that was a really good comment on a post. Helped me actually understand a bit further as well.
Yeah, and I think and I'll jump to the other industry where drones are used as a tool, but just on the security side, if you think of the issue we have in South Africa, massive infrastructure theft and vandalization. There's a World Bank report, I've posted on it. I think it was a 2023 end of year World Bank report, and it cited the loss of actual direct infrastructure and knock-on effects economically to an annual loss of something like, and I'm probably misquoting this number now, something like 3.5 billion rand.
Sure.
It's huge. So it has knock-on effects. Literally, it has a GDP effect. That's how significant it is. And so if you think of ground forces, security forces that are armed, alarms, all sorts of camera systems, etc., protecting national key points. This is rail. This is the likes of ESCOM, the mines, etc. If you think of all of those tools, the most rudimentary being a guard with a torch, the most kind of tech effective tool, adding to that layered defense kind of solution, the drone is the most effective. But it can't operate in isolation. It's an eye in the sky. Yeah. So we can see at night with thermal. The smallest drone, which is an enterprise drone, which became quite famous now with the Ukraine war, they're not expensive, they're highly effective. And having an eye in the sky to identify the threat, to isolate the threat and pursue, but also protect ground forces. Oftentimes I've spoken about this, the guys on the ground are on eye level. They maybe see 1 or 2 suspects and they will go in to try and apprehend. Whereas the drone can now say, actually, guys, there are 10. And it looks like from the heat signature, they're armed or they're carrying stuff or whatever. And so in that instance, it's a very important vantage point that has never been there in private security operations. So, there are situations where we operate or sites where we operate where the security guys will not go in to a potential dangerous situation without the eye in the sky protecting them.
Yeah, I fully understand that. It's I've got a little DJI drone at home, and you can send it down the road to see what's going on. You get a pretty good view, and I totally understand. These drones, Kim, are they? First of all, we've got major supply chain issues on aircraft around the world, backlog like you can't believe. IATA released a report yesterday that's rather alarming because there's simply not enough airplanes. Are these drones available? Are they freely available? Are they affordable to, I suppose, companies like yourself? I don't suppose these are things that individuals are just going to buy and play around with. They require some level of certification, I suppose.
Yes. So the industry, I think globally, and it's quite interesting because it's very topical at the moment with what's happening in the US, but the enterprise drone industry in the world is dominated by a Chinese supplier. And I don't know for sure, but I'm thinking like 15 years ago, a guy started messing around with something that could fly and carry a camera. And as only the Chinese can do, throw money at the problem, throw research at the problem, and throw many clever people at the problem. And you have a company like DJI, who has dominated the global market. They have, through iterations and putting things out there, for the market to test, pretty much perfected a platform that, for what it does, the specs it has, is really good value for money. Yeah. So in South Africa, the CAA knows the DJI drones. They can get registered fairly easily. We have to go through system safety assessments as well, just if a new model comes onto the market or a new type of drone, that has to go through type approval now for the system to be tested, system safety assessment, and then all the registrations. We even have to have a fireproof plate with the reg number, just like in manned aviation. So it's pretty much the same. It's very arduous. So is that kind of drone available easily? Yes. Do we sometimes have supply chain issues? Yeah, we do. And this is where, as a business, we have identified the risk because we have a whole fleet of DJI drones. But if, for example, at some point we can't get batteries, which are consumables, then we're grounded.
Yeah.
So we've seen that that need, and again, not everyone can do it, but I have a very, very clever entrepreneurial business partner who's been ahead of the game. And so we know that we need to be assuming that there could be supply chain issues, which haven't been that evident. There has been one time where, and we think it's kind of consistent with the start of the Ukraine war, where maybe, I don't know, don't quote me on this, I'm just saying what I assume, what we were all thinking, but that, a lot of these DJI drones and batteries were going to that place and not here. So yeah, sometimes there's a demand, and that's why we've developed our own drones.
Oh, really?
And we're operating our own VTOL drone, and our multi-rotor drone is in process, really been approved, but we haven't put it out in the field yet. But you have to not be reliant on a supplier.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Yeah, there has been dominance by one player, but that said, the smallest thermal drone is very available, and for 120,000 Rand you can get a really nice tool with a bunch of batteries and what have you that can put you in a position where you can actually go and do some nighttime security work. So is 100,000 Rand accessible to everybody? No. But is it reasonable to say that if that's the space you want to operate in, that's actually a reasonably priced tool for what it does? I think yes.
For sure. What are you, from a tech perspective with the drone, you mentioned batteries there a couple of times. I suppose battery technology is developing all the time, and I assume the camera as well. Are those the two main things? And I suppose if you add on thermal imagery and all that stuff, but as the tech evolves, I suppose you want to start to add this new stuff to your drones. Is that what you're paying for?
Yeah, you're paying for the camera. I mean, in some instances, the camera is way, way more expensive than the actual drone. And the other thing that I kind of remind people of is to say that we're so obsessed with the drone, but the drone is the carrier of what we call the payload. So the payload can, in another industry where we use drones as a tool, is, for example, in the construction, in the engineering, in the surveying field. So surveyors and, let's say, structural engineers will go and do an assessment on a piece of infrastructure, for example. They would use various tools, LiDARs, different kinds of scanners, and drones. So therefore, being a drone pilot with a drone and a license isn't necessarily always going to allow you to start a business, for example. Are you a surveyor or are you an engineer who then can use a drone to add to the toolbox? Yes, right? Think about it that way. So I have a toolbox, I'm adding a tool.
Yeah.
And so in the case of those guys, they would have a drone that could have variable payloads. So they have adjustable payloads. So they can, okay, today I'm using my LiDAR, and tomorrow I'm using a normal day RGB camera or whatever. So it depends on what it is you're wanting to do. That will then drive what your camera is. I reckon the camera, or let's say payload or camera technology, is pretty spot on. I mean, some of our drones have cameras on them that have a zoom that, you can spot a person's freckle on their forehead, in surveillance operation, number plates, vehicles, faces, and things like that. We've done some very cool stuff where from 3-4 kilometers away, done surveillance with SAPs and multidisciplinary agencies before a big takedown. And that's very cool. So camera camera technology is pretty out there. From a thermal perspective, in the civilian space, we are limited to the specs that we can use. But from a military space, I mean, and like dual systems, paramilitary approved, we could use them. But there's always that thing that says, what is the market willing to bear price-wise? So, we can quote our clients the best things, paramilitary drones with paramilitary, spec'd thermals, but will they pay for it? And so sometimes you revert back to, not you, but you and the client revert back to the most rudimentary thing, which is a drone pilot in a vehicle with the drone and a armed guard next to you, and you're talking on the radio in the middle of the field. Like, that's as rudimentary as it gets. And then from a increasing of tech perspective, it's really around, can we take the human out of those dangerous situations? So drones are already doing that. We're removing the human from the front line, let's say. We can remove the human at least 5 kilometers, but with the VTOL longer range drones, 10, 15, 20 kilometers from the area of action. And the tech there is really around computer vision. And that's what we're solving for now as well, is how clever can you be with identifying objects of interest?
Very interesting. Seeing a drone as a tool is a unique way of looking at it that I hadn't before. Kim, just something I did want to ask you. Ryan and myself, we've spoken quite a lot, a little bit tongue-in-cheek on the podcast at times, about the eVTOL space that we're hearing so much news about. There's Joby, there's Archer, a whole lot of these companies popping up, and we've had a bit of a tongue-in-cheek discussion as to, hey, if you're going to invest in something right now, it might be worthwhile, picking the right one, because whoever manages to get this thing approved first, surely there's a market for it. And just looking at it, in preparation for today, that the lines for me are a little bit blurred. Is that a drone? Is that a totally separate part of is it a new startup segment of aviation, or is it sort of falling under your radar, or are you just ignoring that side?
We're talking about like urban air mobility, right? Air taxis.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Correct. Yeah.
Oh boy. Look, when we talk about these things in our drone forums and things like that, I am not the cleverest person in the room. And I am not good at predicting the future with these things. But here's my take on it, right? 2 things. One, when I used to live in London and the Docklands light rail first was built, and the first time I got onto that Docklands light rail and I got in and I was like, where's the driver? Where's the driver? It's that thing that goes, I'm used to something, and how is this thing now going to get me there safely without the conductor or the train conductor or whatever? And so fast forward that to, a light aircraft or a small aircraft, and now you're going to have something that's unmanned. Obviously, it's conceivable that could happen. But my brain always goes to, let's solve the problem technically and of course, the very ports and the designs and everything's speeding up and people are solving for all this stuff and it's great. So where you've got will and skill and funding, anything's possible, in my opinion. But also, like, who's going to, I don't know. I don't think this is going to be something that we're going to see very soon. So, like, it's basically going to be something that would be likened to, I'm going to get to the airport by my private helicopter because I just don't want to spend time on the road. And so is it going to be a cool thing for rich people? Or is it going to be solving something that's going to be available to the masses who actually really need proper transport?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know, people are going to judge me for this, but let's solve it because it's a cool thing to solve. But is it really, really going to be adopted by people other than rich people who can say, I'm here with my air taxi?
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. And that's sort of, I suppose, this sentiments of myself and Ryan as well, that, we kind of can't quite see this playing out. And I suppose you never can. And then it's just suddenly there. But, we'll see. I suppose the one question that comes to mind then is, they speak about, instead of, taking an hour to commute to the airport on the shuttle, you'll just catch an air taxi. It'll take you straight to your terminal. And then you kind of say, yeah, but if an air taxi does that, why doesn't it just fly me backwards and forwards to Bloemfontein, So the lines are a little bit blurred there. I suppose it's a developing market that we'll continue to keep an eye on. Just going back to traditional drones, we did mention the regulator earlier on, and I suppose they had to base their initial regulation on something. I don't. Was it the FAA? Was it in Europe? Do you know what the initial sort of basing of that regulation was? And just a follow-up question there, if you could change something right now with the regulation, would it be that process speeding up, or is there something that you think, hey, if they could just pass this through, it will really help the industry here grow?
Okay, so to your first question, Brian, so actually, you should have Sam Twala answer that question, because we often say to him, if we want to blame someone for the drone regulations, it's him and his team, because he was at the CIA at the time. But then I turn it around and say, well, if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be where we are today. I don't think there was anything to base it on.
Okay.
So we've obviously got ICAO as the base of what we base our regulations on. And then it was, okay, so what do we do in manned aviation? And I think that's how they came up with the certification model. I don't think anyone else did it in the world.
Yeah.
As far as I understand, I might be wrong, but that's my understanding of it. So they really were the leaders. People have now obviously leapfrogged us in certain ways. I'll say two things. When I speak to my colleagues in Ireland, for example, they started out with what we are kind of aiming for in that categorization model, or open category, which says, go get yourself a drone, go register it somewhere, go do a little course or something, and just play, just do it. And then to my one of my friends in Ireland in the industry would just say, and then people did dumb things. And now they've shut it down, basically. Now they kind of are doing something akin to our certification model, and it's putting people out of business. So do you start something that's more controllable and tight, and then you loosen it up? Or do you start out just free for all, and then you have to shut it down because people are doing stupid things? So I don't know what the answer is. What I would change if I could today, and obviously you mentioned barrier to entry, anything that's got a high barrier to entry is good for some people that are clever, have the resources, have the will and the skill, and that's great. And actually, maybe that's where we kind of decided to do this thing, because it was a high barrier to entry. It's difficult. It's very difficult. So is it open to everybody? I think the way that we look at this is aviation is unforgiving. Is this open to everybody who just wants to dabble in it? Absolutely no. We share airspace with manned aircraft. Like you can't just go and give a drone to anyone and hope for the best or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that high barrier to entry is difficult for people to start a business and make money and what have you. But I also think if I could change one thing, it would probably be the process, not the regulations necessarily. If it was like something I could do today, just get things done quicker, because that would already change how we can operate. And of course, we'd have another hour, Bryan, if we were going to talk about, what we need to change and how we need to evolve. Yeah, the quick thing for me would be, can we get our drone pilot licenses renewed quicker? If it's a 10 working day turnaround, but it actually is 3 or 4 weeks in some instances because of their volumes. Like, can we speed that up? Is there something we could do that could be online? Could we self register our drones? It would be like we have one model that you register and you go through the process, but now we have 50 of them. But we have to go through that same process for every single one just to get a new reg. It's a whole fleet. So there are things that we could do that are actually probably not that arduous to change, that would make operations a lot easier.
Yeah, lots of parallels to just normal aviation problems, I suppose. But it does hint at your original point that in South Africa, we aren't, necessarily behind the curve. And in lots of ways, we were ahead of it. And, as a normal civilian, you do not want to be in your home at night knowing that there's unregulated drones flying above you. Some of these things are pretty big. And if they had to crash into your house or into, a vehicle driving, there would be mass casualties. I mean, these are serious pieces of equipment, and you certainly want it regulated. Have there been any major issues in South Africa? And it won't be, and I'm sure it wouldn't have been proper registered drones. I'm sure we have had issues here. I can't quite remember if there's been any drone strikes with local aircraft here in South Africa. I suppose they have, with the guy taking a chance in his DJI Mini or something like that. But lately, it's been quiet on that front. Or am I mistaken?
There have been a few near misses. I know of one in particular. But so when we look at this, okay, there are two things that I would say. One is, there's never been a fatality, thank goodness. And oftentimes when we talk about the risks, we dramatize it a little bit, but that doesn't mean that it's not an actual risk. So, a 1 kilogram Mavic that you could actually go buy at Macro, I call them Macro specials, could down a helicopter if it hits a tail rotor. It's conceivable. And my conversations with people who just poo-poo this thing are always around safety, not regulations, because South Africans are rebellious by nature. And so if you lead a conversation that says you got to follow the regulation, people would by nature say, I don't care. But the safety aspect of it is important. So your drone might be incinerated, and that's fine or not fine, but no life will be lost. Yeah. But a helicopter downing will lose lives or cost lives. So actually, when I see someone just throwing a drone in the air somewhere, and I'll just say to them, hey, do you know what airspace you're in? And they suddenly go, what do you mean? I go, can you hear that helicopter? We're in Varticloof controlled airspace. You probably shouldn't be flying your drone here. And then I'll approach it from an educational perspective. So we haven't had fatalities or a fatality as far as I know. The thing about enforcement of regulations is very much around, you've got to know what you need to enforce. Yeah. And the enforcement tends to be around drones that are registered. The drones that aren't registered outnumber the registered drones. And so the hobbyists are actually the risk. The guys that don't know or choose not to know. And there are actually some stats. You can tell I'm not great on remembering them off the cuff, but I mean, they are probably
stats on the Bryan Air podcast.
But like if you think of like 3,500 registered drones or something like that, in South Africa, and the CAA isn't great with releasing actual stats regularly, but I think it's something like 3,500 registered drones that are registered by operators, and then you compare that with what SARS has declared at some point around, I don't know, over 100,000 drones that have come into the country. So are there like, 50,000 drones being operated by kids and their dads and their friends that are in places where they shouldn't be? That's, I think, more of a risk. And that, I guess, is the case of saying, or case to be made for, let's give that group of people who want to play with their drone something to be able to comply with. So are there drone zones? Are there little corridors? Are there safe ways of doing this? There are private drone operator rules. There are. But where do you find them? The CAA website is probably not easy to navigate for a kid that's just got a drone to try and understand what they can do and what they can't do. And basically the private operator rules say you can operate in your back garden. That's essentially it. And so people don't want to do that. They want to go to a park, or they want to go to the sea, the beach, or whatever. And so that's the conundrum around how do you keep safe the skies when you've got, let's say, 50,000 drones operated by hobbyists who don't know or don't care to know how to safely operate them.
Yeah, I was, when I bought my little macro special, I was under the impression that it would be blocked off from even getting airborne in certain areas, but it doesn't. You can, right next to 03 right here at the moment, and no doubt if I tried to get it airborne, it would fly. How far away is it from? I mean, surely you could have these sort of blanket nets that just would not let these things get airborne. Particularly for these, I suppose it might be an issue with like the surveillance type drones, but for that you need it needs to be regulated. I wonder if we are getting to the point with so many drones and so freely available that they might have to blanket block off certain areas.
Yeah, it's a global issue that's trying to be solved. If you go to drone conferences abroad, they will have companies exhibiting there, and I've seen them, I've spoken to them, that are specialists in counter drone technology. Airports are huge in this. So it's hardware, it's software. How do we keep a drone from entering your aerodrome? And I mean, we've all heard some stories about, drones, whether they're by nefarious players, because that's a big threat, huge threat. What's to stop a massive VTOL from entering an approach path and, colliding with the jet, taking off or landing or whatever. There's big concern. And so here's what I'd say. In fact, I don't know why, but I was at some point invited by the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism. I think they probably tried to contact someone who's like the representative here, and they didn't answer their email or whatever, and they found me. So I was on these forums and I presented some stuff as well. The point is, if someone wants to do something untoward with a drone, they're not going to import a DJI drone or a drone that's identifiable. A drone or an unmanned aircraft could be built out of Coke bottles.
Yeah.
Like, you really could do that. If you're just a little bit clever, you could put some planks together and put some motors and electronic speed controllers and props on and a radio, and you could fly it in something. So I think the thing to solve is, how do you like early detection, and the detection part's been solved for easily. So through triangulation, you could see maybe where someone's flying. So that's software and hardware. Some countries have radar, obviously, that's more expensive. But then how do you neutralize? So once you've identified, okay, there's something that's untoward in our airspace, how do you neutralize it? So jamming, people talk about jamming, but that would then, shut down networks and Wi-Fi networks and everything. The Chinese would tell you that they have stuff that you could use to shoot drones down. They have nets, they have all sorts of stuff. So these conversations, while we're having this conversation, I can promise you there's conversations going on around how to safeguard airports. So while we're at Securex, for example, we often have people from AXA and people who are trying to solve these things, and they come and say, I know you do drones, but can you do anti-drone? And there are products available. So I think we just need to get cleverer about where we need to safeguard, understand the risks, and spend the money. As I always say, where there's a will, skill, and the funding will come, but you can solve problems.
Yeah, for sure. I think the last thing that we need is a big incident with a commercial aircraft or something like that does cause, one regulator around the world, maybe the FAA or EASA or something, to say, right, that's it, no drones until we solve the security problem. So that's always a threat. Kim, I want to take you outside the industry for a sec, just go a little bit more on the personal side. It's a question that I'll ask everyone on the show. So many tools available. We have spoken about tools today, but obviously with the rise of AI and all sorts of digitization going on, is there anything in your life? You're a business owner, you're making strides here. What are you using that is helping your day-to-day? It's making it better, that's making you more productive, and just helping you get your work done. Is there anything in particular that you want to share?
Gosh, ChatGPT is my best friend. I was quite anti it initially. I thought my initial response when people started using any large language model, but ChatGPT seems to be the one that we all started with, right? But my response was always, it's cheating, right? But I can tell you now, just using it properly to get a framework for something. I've used it for my my training. I do some running. Well, I'm a wannabe ultra runner, okay? So I dabble in it. I've done some ultras, whatever. Putting together training programs. So that's like on the personal side. For work, writing policies, we are going ISO. So we're having our final ISO audit now next week. You need policies coming out of your ears. Your intention is there. You know what you do. You know what you want to do. You know what you want to say. Prompting something correctly and getting something as a framework to work from is just the best thing that's ever happened to me. So if anyone is still not using some large language model, just do it. Don't use it like Google. But I think about it as having like a best friend that can search the internet in 2 seconds and help you, be more productive. So, that's what I'd say.
I love that response. And I also like, because I think I felt the same way. If you use it at the beginning, you think, geez, I am cheating here. But now it's very much part of the workplace. And if you aren't using it, your responses might not be up to the required standard. So it's certainly encouraging people to go and use the tools available, ChatGPT certainly being one of them. Kim,
what I would say though, Bryan, is please, anyone who's listening, don't go and ChatGPT a LinkedIn post and just post it straight in.
No. That is my absolute pet hate at the moment. There are so many. In fact, at one point, I was a little bit concerned that it was going to kill LinkedIn, because I know already on LinkedIn, some crazy stat, I might be wrong, but it's like 1% of the people that actually use LinkedIn post. So not many people post. and most of the people there are consuming. Now you've got a lot of the people that do posting direct responses from probably a one question input to ChatGPT. Write me a LinkedIn post about the recent Securix drone expo or something, and it gives you people can see if it's from chat. The emojis, the correct
the dash.
alignment,
What is that double dash?
The double dash. Get rid of those double dashes. Even if you are going to post something directly, just give it a once over. Go over, get rid of those double dashes. Yeah, it drives me a bit bonkers there, because you kind of feel a bit cheated. I'm reading this thing, but I could have got that same answer myself had I prompted the ChatGPT. So it's certainly not there to create your post, but it might give you an idea that you could use to formulate a LinkedIn post. But Kim, it's been awesome chatting to you. It's been a long time coming, and I learned a lot, I must say. There's certain bits of this industry that I know absolutely nothing about, and being so closely aligned to it in aviation, it's about time that I did find out a bit more, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners agree with me on that. That's a wrap for today. If this hit home or gave you clarity, share it with your crew and hit subscribe for tools that help you scale beyond the flight deck. Visit bryanrosevear.com or support the movement at patreon.com/Bryan Air. This is more than just a podcast. It's a mission helping aviation professionals rise above the noise, build freedom, and take control of their future. Kim, I hope you'll come on the show again soon. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much. I had a great time chatting, and absolutely, let's do this again. I think there's loads more we can chat about.
There's loads more. I think this is step one. Let's keep the conversation going. It's nice to now be aligned with the drone industry. For a long time, it was not keep those guys on the side, but I think now we're at the point where we've linked up. So we're
sharing airspace, so we should be friends.
Exactly, and a lot of my ex-colleagues and that have gone and done drone licenses as well. So even the licenses are overlapping now. So no, we're all part of the same team.
Amazing. Good to chat. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim.